Hello, hello, everybody.
Hello.
Welcome back to the podcast. Today, we thought we'd talk a little bit about managing finances while in a relationship and even while living with a partner, because that is something I think, Dev, you definitely have more experience with this than I do, only because that's only become my circumstance very recently. Although I say that, it has been almost a year now. I actually calculated it a bit ago. Since my nikah, it's been like, I want to say 9 or 10 months. Like, it's almost been a year, which is
Oh, it's a
crazy.
long time. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the transition of like living with someone, then figuring out finances and balancing that world, I don't really think is talked about enough, or the expectations that come with it, how to do it in like maybe a healthy way.
Yeah.
So I wanted to talk a bit about that. And now that I've said that you probably have a little bit more experience doing that since you've lived with your partner for quite a few years now, has there been a transition from when you started kind of managing your finances and how that worked compared to how you deal with it now? Or have you done it the same throughout?
I think the transition mainly for me came with going from being okay, so you're a couple that lives together, and then you're a couple that owns a flat together because so I'm not married yet, but we bought our place just before COVID, which was just over 5 years ago. No, almost 5 years ago, which is crazy in itself. But so the biggest transition for me came across the buying period because that required like in and of the process of buying a place required a lot of conversations around like finances and being open and understanding what our financial picture as a couple was because we bought together. But when we didn't live together and we were just a couple, I was also in a place, so this was before I got like quote unquote good with money. I was also like quite a financially anxious person. I had a lot of shame around like how much money I spent, how much debt I had. My like general like bad money mindset was like at the forefront for me. So before we moved in together, I hid a lot, like actively tried not to talk about money, and like I had a lot of I just like hid a lot about like how much I spent or how much I had or my ability to spend and save and all that kind of stuff. And then when we moved in together, I still hid a lot of that because at the same time, this was still like 2018, so I hadn't really got to the point I am now with money. And we like I just paid my rent, we split the bills down the middle. We split out food shops. You know what, we actually didn't do anything formal with splitting food shops down the middle, but we don't really cook as much together and stuff, so we didn't do too much down the middle with that. But general, the big expenses that take up like the biggest part of your budget when you're in your early 20s, those things were split down the middle. And then when it came to buying the flat, then went to the mortgage advisor, and then we're sitting in a room, like me, my boyfriend, the mortgage advisor together, and he's asking questions about like, what's your salary, how much do you make every month, how much do you save every month, how much debt do you have, and you have to like answer all these questions in front of your partner. So then like everything's just literally physically out on the table on this like piece of paper, going in to calculate like your mortgage affordability and stuff like that. And then after those conversations, we're going back home and putting together these spreadsheets on, okay, now that we know everything about each other, like how much money do we have to like spend, save to buy the flat that we can afford to buy, how much can we afford to buy. And then it was opening up bigger conversations around like, okay, well, when we buy this flat, what do we do then? Like, what's the next step for us? Like, do we want to keep it? Do we want to do it up? Is this like a starter flat? Do we want a house after? Like, it just introduced all these other questions about your relationship that are directly linked to the finances at that time as well, that we probably wouldn't have had those conversations if we didn't buy the flat at that point. And then after the flat, after moving into home ownership, that's when we formally set up like an actual joint account, and we'd contribute to the joint account, and we still contribute to the joint account every single month a same amount of money that just covers, again, just like general flat costs and food shops and stuff. So we're a bit more like structured now in terms of how we approach like costs as a couple that own this thing together, but we don't have like a joint account that we both contribute money to, that's for like the rest of our life. So that's probably something I'd think about more like post marriage, because then the legalities of like splitting that money or like having entitlement over things as a married couple, like I mean more in the terms of like the eyes of the government and the eyes of the law, that's when I'd have more security over like sharing more assets together that don't just cover the flat. So we're like, if we're saving together, if we're investing together, stuff like that I'd want to do after marriage because of all the legalities around that as well. And also something else that I've only just started to think about is like prenups and postnups. I don't know if you've ever thought about
Would you
that.
get a prenup?
I think I would, just because like there's a lot of the risk that you're exposed to if you don't get a prenup is quite significant. And I also think about it in terms of like health insurance, because I know the argument with a prenup is like, oh, you're foreshadowing like a divorce, or you're putting a dampener on like romance and all this stuff. And I'm like, well, if you get life insurance, you're not foreshadowing ill health, or like, yeah, you know what I mean? You're not foreshadowing illness. You're just protecting yourself when the realities of life inevitably show itself. And like, I'm sure there's probably some quote for divorce rates, there's quotes for breakups, and like, I love my relationship, love my boyfriend, all that kind of stuff. Not foreshadowing anything bad happening, but
it's quite high though, I think.
Yeah, they are high. You know what I mean? They're not even that low. I'm not foreshadowing anything bad happening, but as a woman, you have to protect yourself. You have to protect your assets, because it's not even just like prenup. It's not a case of, oh, I want to protect everything that's mine before I go into this marriage. It's actually, I want to ensure that anything bad or anything that's becomes a debt or something that I potentially could not afford to repay that happens on my partner's behalf doesn't become mine as well, because that's also something that you protect yourself against with a prenup, which I think is easily forgotten about. Yeah, it's like I
didn't know that.
Yeah, any debts that your partner then takes on after marriage become your debts without a prenup. And like you don't necessarily think about that, and you just don't know what's going to happen in life that's going to require you to take out loans or like, you know, anything. You just don't know, so why not take that protection out? But yeah, what do you think about prenup?
That's so interesting that you mentioned that extra point that I didn't even know about. So I always thought about prenups in the sense where you're just protecting the assets you already have, which, do you know what is hard? I didn't do one. I don't have one. But it was a conversation at one point, and I think we were kind of open to the idea of doing it because we both have property and businesses and like our own assets and things. I'll be honest though, I don't think we maybe took it as seriously as maybe we should have done. Like, it just wasn't one of those things that we saw as a necessity.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I feel like that everyone's situation will be different, and I still would advocate for protecting yourself, especially as a woman. Like, I think it's still important. I just think because of like the amount of time we'd known each other and just everything that's happened in our own personal lives, I don't think it was the forefront of our minds to like add that to a list of stuff that we needed to do like before marriage. I don't know if that's something that you can do even after marriage, if it's still an option, because I know pre is the idea.
Yeah, there's a postnup.
Yeah, so I mean, there's still ways to. Isn't that like like a postnup? Isn't that like, say you did get divorced, this is what would happen?
No,
or is that?
I think a postnup is like you can just. It's like getting a prenup except after marriage.
Right. Okay. So, well, then there's still options, right? But I felt like we were kind of in an equal place anyway, where we both had our own properties, we had our own things. It wasn't like someone was like gonna lose out more than the other if anything was to happen. Yeah, when you talk about the post-nup prenups, the idea essentially is to kind of fairly split out like how you would divvy up your assets, or like what would happen in the event of like you separating. And actually, to be fair, I have heard good valid points as to why you should get a prenup, other than the fact that, oh, in a divorce, like, you want to protect yourself, is the fact that if you don't do that, then you are automatically, like, the government then makes the rules in your relationship as to how things should be done, whereas like you're more in control, which maybe again I should have thought more about that, because I did, we had, the thing is, we had the conversations, but then we just didn't do it. And I feel like that's probably very common. Like, people probably had the intention of like, okay, we want to be in control, because it's not, I never really saw it as like, oh, if we separate, it's more a case of like, well, if we have all this stuff, like, how would we want to, like, if we're the ones in control, like, we own this stuff, how would we want to split it up, and how would we want things to work? But then I always just assume that if that happened, like, we would still be able to communicate that. But then again, that's just,
You just never know. Yeah, that's like you just
assuming
thinking in good
best
faith.
case.
Yeah. And best case, I feel like best case doesn't always happen in the way you envision it to. And I think that's why all these like legal things exist. Like, I think what might be good for you to even look into is like getting a will and stuff written up, right? Because if you're less concerned about splitting stuff between the two of you, then it's more like, and you want just control over your assets, then like wills or like estates or things like that are good to have covered between you as a couple. But that's definitely not like legal advice at all. But even with the sense of with the conversation of like prenups and postnups, they kind of insinuate the fact that you'd want to create some kind of entitlement, whether that's 50-50 or not, between the two of you, right? In a couple. What do you think about splitting things as a couple down the middle? Because I know the conversation around splitting things, it kind of these days it falls back to either salary and like how much you earn as a couple, especially I guess like as a couple that works, assuming you're not like young, and also what kind of stuff goes on at home, assuming you do live together, because there's probably there's different ways to split things. If you don't actually live together, I feel like it's a lot simpler. If you live together but you're not married and you don't share like investment pots, savings, actual full-on assets, it's different. If you live together and one of you is unemployed, then it's completely different. But I think also the part that we generally forget as an entire society is, I think what you've mentioned before, your mental load as a woman in the household, and all the like unpaid, like invisible tasks that go on behind the scenes that no one ever talks about, that allows your life to run as a functioning life, that allows you, whether you're the man or the woman, to bring money in. So I want to know your thoughts about this, because I feel like you're generally quite wise. And like, how did you talk about these things with Sunny?
So it's so circumstantial, like you just mentioned. So I feel like there has been different phases for us, and there still will continue to be. So my stance on the whole 50-50 is like, nothing is ever 50-50. I don't think that actually exists. Like, I don't think you can ever fully equally divide stuff up like that. Like, if you're talking about the finances like a bill, yeah, you can share that half and half, but I don't necessarily think that makes something automatically fair, because of the things you've talked about. Like, for example, if we were both on like completely different salaries but we're splitting everything down the middle, that's not fair on the person that's on a lower salary. If someone in the household, now this is in the scenario that you are actually living together, because I think if you're not living with your partner and you're talking about finances, I feel like it's a whole different conversation. But when you're both equally benefiting from, you know, the roof over your head and the bills that you pay for your heating and your gas and your electric and everything that you're both benefiting from while living in a household, if you're both splitting the bills equally, but then only one of you is managing the household, I'm talking about like household chores, like actually organizing the bills and knowing when things need to be paid, and actually, even if you both put the money together, but then say you don't have a joint account and it comes out of one person's account, they're the ones responsible for making sure it's ready to be paid on time. And if there's one person that's constantly responsible for all these little things, again, even though the bill is being paid by both of you, I don't necessarily think that's still equal, because that person has that extra mental load and that extra task to then like look after and organize all the things around the finances. So I feel like there's so many different situations and ways you could look at it, but in my eyes, like I don't really think you can ever fully convince yourself that things are 50-50 in my household, because I just don't think human nature, you're not going to like always be able to fulfill that. Like people's salaries can even change. Like you might feel stable now, but like I was made redundant 6 months ago. So in a situation like that, then what do you do? Now, we actually got married after or in the middle of that scenario happening for me. But for me, luckily I still had my like social media income and stuff I was doing outside of work. So it did affect me a lot, but not to the extent where I was like literally unemployment level. I was still earning and I could still pay my bills. So, and then I think there's another level beyond that as well where, okay, now we're just a married couple and we're just the two of us and we both like have an income and that's fine. But then when kids are involved, I feel like there's very different conversations to have, because at that point, I think it becomes even more obvious that things can't be 50-50. Like if the woman is literally birthing a child, growing it for 9 months, like whatever the man is doing is never like, he can never take on that role. So how can anything in that realm be 50-50? I don't think it can. And I've had conversations with Sunny about if we were to have a child, like how that would impact us financially. And I've been quite clear, you could say, about my in a sense, I basically said that like if I was to have a child, like I will not be financially responsible for anything. Like he has to know that he can financially take care of us for at least that first year. Like I'm not putting a penny towards anything, and I'm not going to be responsible. I'm not going to be worried about finances. Like that is just like, that's what I've expressed, because and again, it's so different for everyone, because I know women literally go back to work straight after giving birth, and like different women want to do different things. And that's not to say that I won't work. That's not to say that I won't be generating income during that time. That's just to say that the pressure is not on me. Like if a bill is due, it's not coming my way. Like I'm not going to be responsible for that, and I'm not going to be worried if it can't be paid. Like it's not going to be my problem at that point in time, because I just think as a woman, I just already know, like I've never been through birth and I've never had the experience at all, but I have friends that have, and I it doesn't take a genius to work out like that's a very like traumatic and stressful and overwhelming time for a woman especially. So I don't know, I feel like that is an important conversation to have, like in terms of expectations. Like if obviously it's a discussion to have amongst the two of you and like what would work best for both of you, but I feel like it's very important to put across your expectations on how you expect things to be done in certain periods of your life, especially when you make the decision to marry someone. I feel like it's the best thing you can do is just be clear on like, okay, well, if X happened, this is how I would expect it to be dealt with. Are you on the same page? Like what would we do in that situation, and what are your thoughts? So yeah, I feel like that's the best thing to do in situations like that. But then I do understand that obviously when things come down to it and when that situation arises, things can change. But I feel like maybe not enough people actually do have those conversations up front, and you know, like they just assume that maybe their partner would operate in the same way or know what they expect in that situation, and maybe that's where things like start going a bit wrong. Because even with the 50-50 stuff, I feel like some women are more than happy to like agree with that and be like, oh, yeah, I'm obviously going to pay half because I live here too, and I'm going to pay half because I feel like that's something that should be equally split out, which is fine. But then nobody talks about, okay, but then the salary differences, if there becomes a salary difference, if one of us becomes employed, like how are we going to treat that situation? So I feel like maybe the important thing is to not only figure out what works for you now, but talk about the things that are potentials to happen and what your expectations are of those like scenarios. Because when that situation hits, I feel like I'm not going to be in the mindset of like, say I just gave birth. I'm not going to then decide to say, okay, Sunny, this is how I expect like our finances to run. That's not going to be my mindset. It's going to be, I've got a whole baby to take care of. Like, I'm not going to be thinking about all the extra stuff that I probably should have discussed before. So I feel like sometimes looking at things in that mindset also helps with your financial stress, because finances do stress people out a lot. And I feel like, I'm sure I read one time that that's like the number one cause of issues in relationships, and it's the number one, like maybe even one of the biggest factors for divorce itself is like the financial
divorce
strain.
and breakups.
Yeah, breakups in general as well. But the financial strain that can happen in relationships, which I think mainly probably happens because people's expectations are not aligned.
Yeah, I think it's like financial strains can be caused from, definitely misalignment of expectations. And then also, I think for women, it's like that case of financial dependence versus financial independence.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is more, I think what you're referring to when you're talking about like having these upfront conversations with your partner and like using scenarios, like using the future, using any examples that like even we're talking about in this podcast episode about like how to bring up the conversation about like how we'd handle stuff financially in the future around this. That's definitely great, because then it allows you to understand how your partner is thinking about certain scenarios and like what their expectations are, figuring out that maybe that doesn't align to yours, and then like, you know, talking more to try and make them align or try and land on the same page. That's definitely an important thing to do. But I think what people struggle with these days, what women especially struggle with, is actually making your partner aware of the unpaid labor that goes on behind the scenes. Because I've had, you know, like conversations around the tasks, the subtasks, the tasks that result from those tasks that happen in the household that allow the household to operate in such a way that both of us actually have a nice life, a nice, you know, set of habits that allow us to then go to work peacefully, earn our money, come home, enjoy our relationship together. And I think in most cases, in most relationships, it is one-sided. It's usually one-sided. I think in probably like quite a bunch of healthy relationships, you've had that conversation, you've made your partner aware of the tasks, and they agree that that's unpaid labor. I think another big probably red flag in a relationship is if your partner doesn't recognize that those tasks going on behind the scenes is not unpaid labor. Yeah, it's like not worthy of counting towards like a financial split or something. I think that's something I've read about a lot, is like your partner actually not accepting the fact that the cleaning, the cooking, the preparing the shopping list, the preparing of the bills, simply even paying the bills, like organizing your council tax and all those things, they take mental load to actually figure out, organize, pay, redo every time the bill is like due again. That takes, even it might take 10 minutes, but that's taking up a lot of mental energy to actually sit down and do it, because somebody has to do it. And there's a lot of people that don't recognize that as a thing that is like unpaid labor that contributes towards like the split of finances in a household. So I think a big part of the battle is actually making your partner be on the same page with you. And then when they don't do that, and they refuse to maybe split things unevenly because maybe you're doing more of the unpaid labor, that's what then leads to more breakups and like divorces and just unhappiness in a relationship. Like if you're putting up with it and not breaking up or divorcing, you're just creating resentment, which is just
building up in the background.
Yeah, building up in the background and like just leading to an unhappy life in general. So like, I don't know if you've had conversations with Sunny about like unpaid labor or like the mental load of tasks, but I've had a few sit down conversations with my boyfriend about like all the things that went on behind the scenes that maybe he didn't realize was happening. Just because I naturally as well, I've never like thought to say, oh, I'm doing X, Y, and Z every day. I actually hate doing it. I actually hate doing it, but we're still splitting everything down the middle. Maybe it's either like, maybe we don't split everything down the middle, or maybe you do some of these tasks as well. So it's like actually the mental load is split down the middle. So then you're both feeling a bit happier. But I feel like that's a very like tricky conversation to have, because it's like almost contextual, and like it is kind of based on what you are happy to do versus not do. That is like a household requires of you to do, and like a household needs to run smoothly. But yeah, have you had any conversations with Sunny around like mental load and like unpaid labor outside of potentially becoming a mum?
Yes, in terms of like just general household chores, for sure. Because I think, yeah, like you said, I'm trying to think like right at the beginning. I think it was something that I was quite hyper aware of, like falling into the trap of me being responsible for everything, especially as the person that worked from home,
Especially as
especially
someone in their masculine as well all the time.
yeah, but also I think you naturally just fall into patterns as well, like just based on your living styles. So, because he was always out at work, whereas I was always at home, it was easier for me to, put a washing load on my lunch break, or like, there was extra little things that I could do in my day that he physically couldn't because he wasn't here. Um, but then that still doesn't take away from the fact that I'm the one that had to think about doing that while I've got my own work to do and stuff going on. So I definitely did have a few conversations, not just even about like household stuff, to be honest. It even came up in terms of like travel. This is something that I'm still working on, by the way. It's still a work in progress. But whenever we plan trips, I don't know if maybe it's because I'm a bit of a control freak, so maybe it's my fault, but I always end up being the one to plan the itinerary, to book all this stuff. Like financially, it's it's even, but the mental load of like doing the the admin side of it always falls on me. So that's something that I've been like, or even like when it comes to packing, like sort, like what do you call it, stuff that we both need, it'll always be me that packs it, for example. And it's just little things like that, and it just sounds so silly when you say it out loud, but that's just an accumulation of things. Like when you add it all up, then it's like, actually I'm doing so much more like thinking and brain work and like planning than you could imagine. So then it becomes like, well, then what do you do in that situation? You either just bring it up and be like, look, this isn't equal, like you need to think about some of these things too, or you need to take care of this part of the booking or packing or whatever it is. Or maybe bring finance into it and be like, well, I took on all this extra load and what you were talking about before, so that has a value to it, and we have to kind of attach a financial value to that work. And maybe you contribute more towards the flights and the hotel, and you take on more of that cost, because then I'm happy to continue doing all the extra unpaid labor tasks. And so I guess there's two different ways you could look at it. I've not actually kind of looked at it in the attaching the financial value specifically. I've always been very much like, get this off my plate. Like this needs to, like, I've been trying to push stuff off my plate. And you know what, it's not even, it does come down to like being in your masculine, being that eldest daughter energy that just kind of expects everything to be her responsibility, so just does it before even asking someone if like they've thought about it first. So there's a lot of different things that come into play. It's not literally because the other person is incompetent and can't do those things. It's just because sometimes, as a woman, depending on your personality type and the way that you like to operate and do things, sometimes you do just get ahead of yourself and end up doing all this stuff and not really thinking to, like, see if everything is even, until it bubbles up yourself and you start getting stressed yourself, and then you actually have to force yourself to pay attention to, okay, I'm actually doing a lot more than what I even want to be doing, and there is a value to this. And like you said, the problem only comes when you raise this with your partner and then that it's not, the energy is not that, oh yeah, I agree, this is extra stuff that you're doing that is an extra burden on you and it actually does have value. So like that's the major red flag, like you mentioned. But
Yeah, I think it's easy to like even accidentally create the expectation in your partner like that this is normal behavior as well, especially if you
yeah,
do this stuff for like a number of years and then suddenly you're like, okay, I'm tired now, can you pay for everything? So
yeah,
it is like, I can get that it's difficult to bring up after a number of years, but it's what I did. Like I spent a long time being a control freak in my masculine eldest daughter, planning everything, doing all the chores, and also just because like I was in that mindset of like I want to be the perfect partner as well, so like I did a lot off my own back just because I wanted
yeah,
to, and like I was looking for like validation in that way. I wanted to be like like the ideal partner basically. And then I realized at some point, I realized that like I was building up resentment in myself of like, I'm doing all this stuff, but we're still splitting so much stuff 50-50, or like it was like financially felt uneven. And that resentment was building obviously because of the unpaid labor. So like only I was able to recognize it. But it was a simple case of like, I just brought it up with like, with emotional awareness to be like, look, I don't hate you. And I don't want to like, I don't want you, I'm not coming to this conversation expecting you to pay for everything, but I will reach a point where like I feel more burnt out and I don't want to actually resent you and our relationship. I just want things to be a bit more even. And you're right about putting financial value on some of these tasks, because that is such a good way to like frame it to people who potentially don't understand what kind of mental load and unpaid labor that you are taking on behind the scenes. Because if you're a man, if you're a husband in the average household, you are getting a private chef, a perfect cleaner, a friggin' virtual assistant organizing your life and your family affairs all for free, while also paying half of all your expenses because you're splitting everything with your partner. Like, that is ridiculous. So actually, if you had to pay for all of those people separately, it would cost probably 3 to 4 times more.
Well, they're full-time jobs in their own right.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
they're like full-time jobs. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you actually had to pay for that, you'd be out of pocket. But instead you get to split the expenses down the middle. Like, first of all, come on. Like, that's just the most easy way to then understand, okay, this is actual labor. We're not just like making things up. But I remember watching like a TikTok last year of this American wife, and she'd basically stopped telling her husband when his like closest family members' birthdays were coming up and stuff. And so then they started going to all these family events, and he would just turn up empty-handed because he didn't think like, oh, my brother's birthday's next weekend, I need to get like a cake and a present, because she was like actively trying not to do all of this unpaid
those
labor.
Scenarios crazy. You know, like when women take on, even so when you're married, like take on the responsibility of remembering your husband's brother's birthday.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
I'm sorry, but if he's not remembering, it's not in my thought process at all. I just think as women we do, and maybe through no fault of our own, wanting to be that perfect wife or wanting to, you know, make the lives of people around us easier, we do end up dumping so much more on ourselves. And to be honest, the man wouldn't even expect, like, if she never did that to begin with, I don't think he would have even expected it. And I feel like you were saying before, is like you would do stuff and not like bring it up, or you kind of wanted it to go unnoticed so that like things were more pleasant like in your relationship, or just while your boyfriend was around. I remember at the beginning I very much used to do that with cleaning. Like I would deliberately clean the whole flat while Sunny was out, because I'm still trying to think what was even my thought process in that, but I almost didn't want to like do it while he was there, but I also didn't want to ask him to do it.
Yeah.
And then I was like, but then it happens so often, and I was like, but he lives here too, and he's making a lot of the mess, and I'm like actually don't enjoy this task at all, and I'm tired, and I'm starting to like get irritated by the fact that it's almost become a then it becomes a habit of like, oh, he comes home to a clean house and he doesn't have to touch a thing. But I'm the one that's made it like that.
Yeah.
So then I started actually cleaning while he was here. And he automatically helped. Like, I didn't even have to ask. But it was me that like made it this thing that it was like my responsibility to begin with. And I was like, if I just done that in the first place, like there was no way he was just gonna like sit and watch me clean the entire flat and just sit there and like not do anything.
Yeah.
So I feel like, yeah, we do just like put this stuff on us. And I think you only really need to kind of maybe look at the financial value of things to help explain if you do are in that situation where they're not getting it. But I would be concerned if someone didn't understand that, oh, yeah, me cooking all the meals every day, me cleaning the house, me doing all the laundry, like me doing all these things is like not tiring or not like extra on my plate. If someone doesn't understand that, then I feel like, yeah, sometimes tough love is needed and you just let stuff like not be done and then they realize actually there's work involved. Like things don't just happen magically.
Yeah. But on that as well, like I want to talk about how when all those things are done, and if you're in a relationship where like that's the expectation that okay, you do this like unpaid labor in the household and you take on the mental load of these tasks, but then you do actually don't have to financially contribute to anything because the understanding is that okay, maybe the male goes out, works, you kind of do all this like unpaid labor and then you don't actually have to contribute. I want to talk about the financial dependence that creates and also like how you navigate those kinds of conversations in those situations, because I also had that mindset of like, okay, well, if we're both doing stuff at home, then we both have a level of like financial independence where like I don't rely on anyone, he's not relying on anyone to cover anything, and I'm not like bound to always be doing the household chores because I need someone to feel like they're like providing for me or something like that. You know what I mean? Like I think it's such a tricky space to be in as a woman if you're doing that, especially if like you've had kids and stuff, and like for example in your situation, or like situation in your like future context of being a mom, and Sunny's gonna be like the main financial provider at that point, the main like financial thinker, everything. Will you have a sense of like, oh my god, I'm dependent on this man?
No, because like I said, I would still be earning my own money. It's just that I wouldn't want the expectation that I'm paying for stuff, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I would never, this is also something I wanted to say in terms of in that situation where if you've, I don't agree to that. Like I would never agree to a situation where I am solely relying on someone else's income to live. Like in a marriage or otherwise, like I would never put myself in that situation. It looks like it when I say that, like, oh, he's going to be responsible financially for the bills and stuff. But that doesn't mean there's not money in my own bank account. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
that doesn't mean that I don't have anything of my own. So when I say that I would not be responsible for finances during that period of time, I still will be earning my own money and making sure that I have my own money essentially. But we've had the conversation where I said that I am not responsible for paying for anything during that period, like worrying about the bills, having that like mental load of thinking, okay, well, our mortgage needs to be paid now, or we've got this bill that's coming. Like that is not going to be a conversation that's going to be brought to me during that time.
Yeah. I love it.
Because I think like when you talk about 50-50, like there is nothing on this planet a man can do that will compare to literally like birthing an entire human. I don't care what anyone says. Like there's literally nothing you can do that will ever like match up to that. So the least you can do is, not stress me about money during like when I've gone through all that. So, but that's something that obviously like we're both on the same page, and that's something that we've discussed, and like I genuinely never have to worry about Sunny like disagreeing on these like very core like things
Yes,
and
he is a
being
very good.
unreasonable.
He's a very good partner and husband, I think, in that
He
way.
really is. So it's never, and do you know what? It makes me sad when people even like worry about bringing stuff up like that with their partner, and people question like, "Oh, how do you raise this topic?" And I'm just like, say it. I don't know, like
But
how.
how do you say it? So like, I'm talking like details. So will you be like you'll be sitting at the table having dinner, and you'll be like, okay, so when I give birth to our child, I don't want to do X, Y, Z. Like, is that do you just like bring it up?
I'm trying to remember how I initially did it. I don't know if either we were already on the topic of kids. Maybe it was something like loosely related to kids in general. That's also like just in terms of advice. Like if you were struggling to bring it up, if you're already on the topic, you can weave it in there. But I do tend to just like, if I think about something randomly, I'll just bring it up, even if it's like completely unrelated. Because if it's on my mind, I have to get it off my chest and I have to be like this is a stress for me. And I think in general, like obviously we got married and the expectation from everyone around you is like kids, kids, kids. But we've had to have those conversations ourselves to be like, are we ready? Like I've asked him outright, like, are you actually ready to be a dad? Like is that what you want right now? Or like, are you financially okay? Because then my next question is, well, you have to be financially
Yeah.
okay because that burden is not going to be on me. So I think, yeah, it just kind of naturally, I don't know, for me, it kind of just comes out naturally because it's a genuine question I have.
Yeah.
And it's not to attack the other person. It's not to like make them feel like, oh, you're trying to get something out of them or you're trying to create, like difficulty for them. It's more a case of like, you both have an understanding of it. You have a mutual responsibility in the case that if you're going to have a kid together, then you are both equally responsible for that kid's well-being. And ultimately, like, the mother's well-being is the kid's well-being. So I think
Yeah, that's
hopefully you're
really
with a
true.
man, yeah, that understands that.
Yeah. I think as well, like when you're in a relationship, and this is going to come back to me being like cringy about relationships, but it does relate back to finances. Like
Mm-hmm.
when you're with someone, ultimately it should be you and that person against the world, not you
Yeah.
against that person. So if you
Mm-hmm.
apply that mentality to your finances, why would you be forcing a 50-50 split on your partner when they are doing all of this mental load and unpaid labor to make your life easy? Why would you make them feel worse about their finances when actually it should be you two as a unit trying to make things work as best as possible so you can both take on the world together and like take on life together? Like I think if you apply that like bigger, like take a step back mentality to your relationship, it does take the weight off of like what sometimes can feel like menial dramas in a relationship as
Mm-hmm.
well. Not to minimize any financial dramas, because like those, they're big, but at the same time they shouldn't be things like, I would hate for conversations like this to actually cause more divorces and breakups and stuff and all
Oh
that stuff,
God.
you know? Like I think like when you have these conversations about money, like it's really great that you're able to naturally bring them up, but like I really like to use content points as like references to bring up conversations about money. Like, you could easily be like, oh, I listened to this podcast about relationship finances and they were talking about like motherhood and stuff. Like we've actually not talked about that yet. What do you think about XYZ? So you
Mm-hmm.
use it as like a jump off point. And then what I've learned to do as well is like sometimes you can associate tricky topics with tricky situations. And like if you've had anxieties around money growing up, if money wasn't really talked about in your household growing up, it might naturally just be a little bit more foreign for you to bring this up with your partner, because we do associate conversations with our partner to be like marriage, kids, the future, happiness, all these kinds of things, right? So naturally you might feel like, oh, there isn't a right time to bring up money because it's serious and like we're talking about like potentially bad things and we're talking about like my feelings, which are not so good right now. So sometimes you might feel more inclined to bring up frustrations while you're in an argument or while you're about to have an argument or while you're in a disagreement. So I think even that, it's important to check yourself and be like, okay, I want to bring up this thing, this important topic at a good point, and it's not going to ruin that good point. It's just going to allow this conversation to happen when we're both in like a more positive mindset, and we're both in like a better headspace to be able to take this conversation forward in like a in like a helpful manner, basically. Like, don't bring up things if you're fighting, because
definitely
it might feel more natural to talk about like negative things when you're fighting, is what I'm trying to say. And that's something that's really helped me as well. Like, actually, when we're in a good spot, being like, oh, let's talk about our finances when we travel, or like when we're planning a trip and we're super excited, I can be like, oh, well, actually, I don't want to do all of these tasks because it makes me hate the trip. Like, it makes me resent the actual thing we're looking forward to. So let's split these things down the middle, you know? It's like, it takes thought to think about when to bring it up, but I think it is important to do that first before actually bringing it up.
I feel like you end up learning a lot more as well when you approach things in that way, or if you just take a step back from the things that you feel like you're responsible for but might not necessarily be responsible for. I feel like there's a difference between being responsible for something sometimes, as a woman especially, and just feeling like you are responsible for it. Because I remember the first, like, when we went on our like mini moon, we went to Turkey, and that trip I was very adamant that, especially after like planning on a car and doing all that like just organization stuff, I was like, the last thing I want to do is now plan a whole trip itinerary. And like, we were there for about 5-6 days, so it was like a good amount of time to like get stuff done. But also, I'm the kind of person on a holiday that wants to know in advance usually what they're doing and like max out the time. And I think we've spoken about this on previous episodes, where I've always wanted to have in mind like that we're actually going to be doing lots of activities and stuff, and I have to like tick off all these like things that we can do there and max out our time there. So I took a different approach with our mini moon, and I was like, actually, this is a fully like relaxation. And I actually put it on Sunny. I was like, whatever we do, like, you have to figure this out, because like it's been a lot these past few weeks even, and I want to just chill. And it was never that he like made me put an itinerary together. It was always like because I wanted to know in advance like what we were doing. But at that point I was like, actually, this is going to be a super chill holiday. I just want to like go with the flow. And then I think I just realized on that trip that he's just more like spontaneous by nature than I am, because he was more than happy, like when like on the day he'd be like, okay, what are we doing today? And I'd be like, over to you. And then he would just go and find something, and he found really cool things for us to do like while we were there. And we did the same thing again when we went to, where did we go? Portugal. We went for our little voucher trip back at the beginning of this year. Again, it was only a very short trip, that one, but I didn't really plan anything for us to do. And we just found it like while we were there, and we actually had such a good trip, and we did so much stuff. But there wasn't this like stress beforehand of like, oh, I'm gonna make this whole itinerary and this is what we have to tick off. And like, I wasn't stressed before it, and I actually enjoyed like the spontaneity of like getting to do stuff that I didn't even expect to happen on the trip. So I feel like when stuff like that happens, then you start to realize like, actually, the stuff that you deep a lot of the time isn't that deep, and you could really just like, you do yourself a disservice sometimes by piling all this pressure on yourself and stressing yourself out with these expectations and things that you feel like need to be done, only for it to actually just sometimes actually just be in your own head and be your own expectations on yourself, because nobody else is like placing those on you. I guess if those expectations are put on you, because I know that actually maybe in some people's circumstances, maybe the man in their life is expecting them to cook their dinners every single night and is expecting them to like do all these things. But then that's probably when you do need to have those sit down conversations and be like, okay, but I have a lot of other stuff going on, and like that's taking a lot of my time, and maybe we could, we could alternate different days that each of us cook meals to make it more even, or depending on your circumstances. So there's ways to work around it. I just feel like I'm very fortunate that I've never been in the position where like Sunny's put on me a responsibility and been like, I expect this from you. It's always been like, if I want to do it, I will do it, and if I don't want to do it, he'll help me.
Yeah, you've had like really clear lines of communication, which I think is obviously like really nice. And I think you know what? I think most relationships do have them. You just need
Mm-hmm.
to like, it's like a muscle. I think the more open communication you have, the easier it is
I think
just
that's the
over the
case.
longer term
Yeah.
of like just bringing things up. I actually really like the point you've made about the fact that most of the mental load or unpaid labor tasks that you put on yourself are maybe just like things that you've taken on that don't even necessarily need to happen. And like
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's just understanding a different way of living that your partner has not yet had the chance to put like to actually put on you because you've tried to control a lot. So I definitely think I've had a little bit of that, especially with travel. I agree. I've had like similar experiences where I've let go of the reins, thought that letting go of the reins means I'm going to have the worst trip ever, but actually I just have a different trip. Like
Yeah.
just a trip that I wasn't necessarily expecting to have. That's not necessarily a bad thing. And maybe I should do a bit more of that at home as well, in terms of like, I don't need like you there are probably many different ways that things can be like cleaned or done, or you know, like there's not just
So
one
true.
way to do something. So I completely agree with that. And I think the whole thing with like this 50-50 trend is like it's give and take. Like once you have that communication and you talk to your partner about like what's happening behind the scenes and how much money you're spending or splitting behind or in front of the scenes, the give and take is all about like, okay, well, let's lay out on the table all the tasks, the mental load you have on, so that everyone's aware of everything that's going on. And then it's either a case of you and your partner are splitting the like chores, the mental load, the tasks, anything that's going on that isn't directly an expense that you're splitting, or you're splitting the actual expense. So either one partner is like paying a lot more and you're doing a lot more of like the mental load, therefore not having to pay so much because if you do both, that's where that resentment comes in. Or your partner's doing an equal amount of the unpaid labor and you're still splitting everything down the middle. And I think the other part of like this whole trend with 50-50 that's going viral is with have you seen like the women who are just kind of that where the expectation is like, okay, so if I have my own money, I earn my own money, I still get just taken care of completely. I don't know if this is like pre or post marriage. I also don't know if like culture sometimes impacts this as well, in terms of like, I won't pay for anything, but I also won't do anything in the household, but the man takes care of everything. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I feel like in Islam that's like preached quite a lot as well, which maybe is where like the differences in kind of the men's approach happens is by
Yeah,
their
the
own
expectations.
cultural, yeah, expectations and just how they've grown up in general, I think. Because that's very much like the approach in a sense. Well, I still like obviously earn my own money and stuff, but like you said, like women a lot of the time earn their own money and the man still takes care of everything.
Yeah, I think it's fine if like that in the financial dependence conversation, if you do have your own money, I think the danger comes when you're
You're
actually
fully
giving up your
relying.
earning. Yeah.
Yeah, that's I think where the disconnect is, and I feel like a lot of people assume that by you wanting this, the soft girl life is like, oh, you kind of just, sit around, do your own thing, or don't really have the financial responsibility of things. But then almost people automatically assume that that means that you don't actually have any finances. Like
Yeah.
you don't like get involved in that world altogether. And I just think that's like not the case. For some women it may be. Like some women do genuinely depend on their man like financially, which I think is a very scary position to be in. And I would always try and not have myself in that situation. Like as much as I love my husband, as much as I think like he would always have my best interest at heart, I would never put myself in the situation where like the only money I have access to is money that he is giving me. Like I would never do that. So I think yeah, there's different ways of looking at it, but I just always would advocate for women to like have your own stuff. Even if you want to be that kind of, the stay-at-home wife or the woman that kind of is pampered, taken care of, don't give up your own financial independence even still. Like you can still have your own money and you can still like have your own pot that you're building, but you can still be taken care of at the same time. Like, that's possible. It sounds very like a lot of people ain't gonna like that. But you know what? You find a man that is happy to do that. I think that's what it comes down to. Like, at the end of the day,
Find a man that's happy to do that. And also, a stay-at-home mom is not just staying at home. Like, you're running a household,
oh
you're
my gosh, if
raising
she's a
children.
mum,
Yeah, like,
yeah, that's totally different. That she's needs to get paid for that.
yeah, like that
Sorry.
is a paid there's a paid job that no one can apply for. So it has
Yeah.
to, like, yeah, I definitely agree. Like, even if you're not being even if you're not splitting things down the middle and going 50-50, have your own assets. You may not need your own income like in the future, but definitely don't only depend on a man. But I think I do appreciate that's also hard to like actually do sometimes as well, especially if you get thrown into situations and like
Yeah.
you've started things off in a way that you don't want to continue. How do you have a child and then start earning? Like, it's, I understand there's loads of like nuances as well that like can impact that situation. But yeah, I'm the same. Like, I definitely just I would never advocate for anyone to be dependent on a man, no matter how happy in your relationship you are.
Mm-hmm. No matter how secure you are. I think, yeah, the advice is to the women that don't have kids yet, start building your own thing on the side. Like, even if you're working 9 to 5 that you'd have to take maternity leave off, like, build your own source of income so that even if you were taken out of work, even if you were, preoccupied with now having kids, once you then get to that point where you've had the kids, you still have your own thing in the background that you can go back to, that you can work on, that you have that little bit of income.
Would you keep that a secret from your partner?
No.
No. So it's just like a normal thing.
Yeah, it would be like, this is my side hustle, or like it could be like a part-time job, because in the sense, when you think about part-time job, that seems like physical, like I have to go out and work, but I don't mean things like that. I mean, like, you can do stuff virtually online, like you can create your own business, like your own products, and a lot of the stuff that we kind of already do ourselves. But as a mum, I feel like that's even more important, to have something that is flexible, because you're not necessarily going to be able to go straight back to work after giving birth and stuff, but maybe a few months into it, you might feel like you want to go back to work, but you still want to be with your child. So then you can still make your money and navigate that life in a more flexible way, but then still hopefully be with a partner that will be okay with, being financially responsible for the family unit now, while you still maintain your financial independence. I feel like that would be my ideal situation scenario. And again, that you just don't marry someone that isn't happy to provide that to you, because there are plenty of men will, but it's just down to, like, again, you have those conversations and you make sure that like you're on the same page with stuff like that. And there'll be a lot of people out there that get angry at the idea of a woman's going to earn her money and like keep it to herself, and it's not that. It's like, you can use that money as a family, but it's just not like, she's not going to be the one stressed with the bills, or like responsible for, making sure that family has a roof over their head. So I think that brings us to the end of the episode. I really hope that you guys enjoyed. I feel like this is quite different for us, a different kind of topic. I think it's a very contentious one. I feel like there's a lot of conversation online about the 50-50 trend in particular. So let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you're watching us on YouTube, we'd love to know what you guys think about that whole trend in general, how you operate, if you are currently living with a partner, if you're married, even if you have kids, like, how do you kind of deal with these situations? Because I feel like we're all up for learning. I mean, I'm very, very new into my like marriage bubble, and I know, Dev, you also have like gone through your own transitions and stuff throughout living with your partner as well. So we want to learn from you guys as much as we want to give advice and hopefully help you guys out. But yeah, if you are listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, make sure you do leave us a rating as well and let us know how you're finding it. And with that being said, we'll catch you in the next one. Bye, guys.
Bye.